Hello, and welcome today to the Eric Osmo studio, exceptionally hosted at the Thales premises for this premiere. Good morning, General.
Hello, welcome.
We have the honor and the privilege of welcoming General Yakovleff, because in our private discussions we were able to talk about the issue of conflict and escalation by Russia. That raises many questions, especially about de-escalation. How do you see Russia's escalation?
Putin is at the top of the ladder compared to us. We spend our time chasing him on the rungs, wondering if we can use another one. There you go. Putin dominates the climbing ladder, which made me think about the concept of escalation.
But is it just rhetoric, or is it something concrete when we talk about escalation?
It has very real consequences because, for example, we've all heard that if we gave solar artillery to the Ukrainians, it would be escalatory, as if the Russians were holding back from bombing Ukraine. Same for tanks, F-16s. So every time, basically, that the Western side wanted to do something to help Ukraine. We've heard this argument from all sides saying, you're escalating the conflict, starting with the Russians. With a word, for example, that's brilliant, and I think they're the ones who invented it. Co-belligerence, in the sense that if you provide helmets and bulletproof vests, you're a co-belligerent Germany. Do you realize how serious this is? You're at war with Russia for no reason, and we gradually realized it. And above all, even when we provide resources, we limit them. We don't give enough. We don't allow Ukraine to reach Putin's level. So it has real consequences.
But it's a form of strategic dialogue between Russia and Ukraine in which they want to exclude us.
Yes, and precisely. This strategic dialogue, this theory of escalation, it's nothing more than a modeling of international relations. It brings a better understanding of the issues and ultimately of what we could do. And
so what exactly is the theory of escalation?
So the theory of escalation? Initially, it's an American concept related to nuclear escalation. So the actions we can take. Step 0 is peace, and step 44. On the scale of the first researcher to have an an, it's nuclear apocalypse. All right, so we start with rhetoric, limited actions, then after that there are limited nuclear strikes, etc. But then the Americans, by continuing this reflection on escalation, brought in some very interesting elements that can be useful to us. For example, escalation can be vertical. It's new means of warfare or a new level of violence in war. For example, when the Russians use the Kinjal, it's an escalation,
hypersonic aeroballistic missile, there you go.
That was in the first months of the war. You were supposed to see something amazing and all that. And so everyone was supposed to be terrified. There is also the opening of other theaters. For example, recently the threat of drones over Denmark. It's a way to divert our attention. Horizontal escalation. And then you can have a political escalation, which is, for example, during the Second World War. Initially, it was about stopping the First World War. It was about stopping German expansion. Afterwards, they said they would put an end to German militarism. So, 3 categories, 3 types of escalation, 3 axes of escalation, knowing that some are multi-axial. For example, informational warfare. It is both vertical because the action is reinforced, horizontal because it moves out of the material field into a new field, and political because it has a political impact.
But isn't all of this also related to our perhaps misunderstanding of Putin and the cultural legacy he carries after the end of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics?
Yes, something that, I don't know, we don't think about. So Putin was raised on communism in his early years, like all the others. And so communism claimed to be committed. The Soviet Union claimed to be engaged in a deadly struggle against capitalism, from which there would be no winner or loser. There would only be one winner because the loser would disappear into the dustbin of history. Whether or not the Soviet leaders truly believed that, it doesn't matter. The people did. And at the very least, that was the worldview in which Putin was raised. Unfortunately for him, the inevitable victory of communism
turned into
defeat, and the Soviet Union fell into the trash bins of history, by the way. But a resurrected Russia. And then Putin reclaimed the Russian heritage and he actually syncretized it with the Soviet heritage. So, based on eternal Russia values compared to the decadent West. But the conclusion of that is that for Putin, this war is more than just a total war. There is no loser at the end of this war, only the winner remains. Whereas in our conception of war, when we went to war with Germany, well, the border would change. We had some, you see, basically, France and Germany would still exist. We're not in this nihilistic, apocalyptic mode of thinking about war like Putin is, which, by the way, applies to him personally. Because the consequence of that, or the opposite, is that if Russia loses the war, it risks disappearing. It risks being dismantled, collapsing. The stakes are extremely high. And we don't understand that. We think it's a limited war. For Putin, it's a war for survival.
For him, losing means being ousted, and for Russia, it's a life or death struggle he's committed to. Thank you.
To say it, I think it's for him personally, for his regime. Because we all want, in Europe, for Russia to survive one way or another. There was a Polish person who said that there needs to be a plan to break up Russia. We'll split it into 14 entities. Actually, China is the main threat to breaking up Russia.
Yes?
Of course, would reclaim the millions of square kilometers Russia seized during the unequal Aigun and Tarbagatay treaties in 1858 and 1864, I believe, if I remember correctly.
By the way, a recent official map from the Chinese Communist Party shows Manchuria and the northern areas recovered. That's it?
That's good news for Putin. So it's existential for Putin. For Russia, since all of us would like Russia to come back, like in 1990, and even back in Soviet times, Russia, well, the Soviet Union was a partner. We could live with it. It held a grudge against us. We didn't know why, but we could live with it.
But there is still a certainty of victory on Putin's part, the feeling that it's either death or victory.
Well, that's part of his rhetoric, which goes back to his communist mindset. Because the victory of communism was presented as inevitable. That was the meaning of history. Capitalism didn't really stand a chance. And so that's the message he sold to his people, that victory is certain, it's inevitable. So yes, we've had problems. Yes, it's happening. The special military operation isn't going exactly as planned. But it's clear, in the end, it's going to end up on our side. And the fact is that Trump helped him a lot to sell this message.
If we go back to the question of escalation, dominance, that American concept. Today, there is a scale of escalation that you mentioned, horizontal, vertical. What level of escalation are we at? Aren't we always chasing it? That's how it seems. What is it?
Are they doing? On Han's scale, I don't even know where we are anymore, but Putin is higher than us, that's for sure. Even today, we have a hard time getting on his level, and we don't want to. We're always afraid of going too far in escalation.
But that's because Russia has mastered escalation, and we simply don't dare to respond to their violations of all the rules, like missiles that go too far, etc.
And there are two reasons for that. The first reason for their mastery is our own limitations, our own fear, our aversion to risk. The second limitation is that Putin, in each of his actions, is wargaming. Beforehand, he tests hypotheses, he anticipates possible responses, and our responses are already factored into his calculation for the next move. While we are reacting, there are drones in Denmark. What do we do about the drones in Denmark?
But you are talking about risk aversion?
Yes.
Since no decision is made, we avoid risk and won't shoot down drones or planes violating our airspace. Out of risk aversion, we only keep backing down. So, I mean, politicians are raised to avoid risk so they don't lose elections. Military strategists focus on making firm decisions. Deciding itself isn't risky.
Making a firm decision isn't risky. It just means you manage risk better. Yes, at least we know what risk we're talking about and what the level of risk is. And very often, refusing the risk now only increases the risk even more. For example, by always avoiding risks, before World War II, we ultimately faced a Second World War.
And how do we get back to the threshold? That is, how do we de-escalate Russia?
There would be, first of all, accept that we are at war with Russia. We are the target. It's NATO, basically.
They have designated us as enemies.
That's it, and they have designated us as enemies. So when it suits them, it's Ukraine, and when it suits them, it's us. So First, we have to accept the fight, because if we don't accept the fight, we'll lose it. It's silly. It's obvious. Secondly, accept the risk, and in particular, look for useful ideas in this theory of escalation. For example, the idea of catching them off guard or outflanking them. For example, when faced with a vertical escalation, aim for a horizontal escalation, or when faced with or the opposite. For example, when the Zaporizhia dam broke. So is it directly the Russians' fault, a direct action by the Russians or not? There's expert debate, but it doesn't matter. They sat on it, so they're responsible. Well, this was the perfect time to say very well the multiple sclerosis attacks that I gave to the Ukrainians. I authorized them to use them, or they steal them. The Russians might have said they don't see the connection, but it's just straightforward retaliation. Own it. You must own it. The Russians would have said, oh no, Zaporizhia was hit unexpectedly since we caught them by surprise. And so the next time they'd be thinking, what are they going to do to us now? And just putting them in that, wait, they've already pulled something on us, so now we have to be careful. That would encourage them to be cautious, and they'd climb the ladder less quickly. But so far, basically, all our reactions have always been pretty weak. And so that encourages them to keep going?
That is to say, every time, on top of that, we would warn, be careful if there are North Koreans. We're going to do something really soft, they do it. Our soft response just balances things out because they've escalated, and in the end, they always go further.
Further, exactly. We let them have it's always them who escalate first.
There's also this development of the idea that there's an inevitable rise in Russian aggression, which we will always be behind in responding to.
Yes, that's the risk for us of getting involved in the escalation already. But despite everything, we still did things. And there are elements now in 2025 that were clearly not anticipated by Putin. For example, the awakening of Europe. Well, that's still something very important. And the fact that the decoupling from America, well, helped by the current Trump administration, it's not. To make us, it's to help Ukraine keep going. I am in 2022. So it was an idea that nobody had, and not just Putin, neither did we. We didn't believe it either. So there's still that, when I say on the scale, he's always above us and everything. There were still, in the escalation, some unexpected consequences to some of these escalations. And also his escalatory speech, which turned out to be false. Every time he said, if you do this, it will be terrible, like the nuclear posturing, for example. Every time, in the end, we looked him straight in the eyes and did it anyway. Giving tanks, F-16s, etc. So not enough, but very little, very late.
Every time.
So Putin climbs the ladder, but the rungs may not be as solid as he thinks.
Putin's intention is still to make us believe that in the end, Russian victory is inevitable. That's what we see with all the bots on the internet, all the comments we get by the hundreds on the channel. And by the way, thank you for commenting like that. It improves the ranking of the videos. Thank you, Russians, for that. But what I mean is that our will is being attacked by the words that say, anyway, we will win in the end. There is no doubt.
It's a very powerful idea, and one that appeals especially to Trump, because it's true that if you already know you've lost the war, it's immoral to keep going. So you might as well stop the carnage right away. I'll take the example of an activist, an environmental activist, who's concerned about animal welfare, who goes into a slaughterhouse and tries to save a cow that's about to be slaughtered. It turns into a bloody fight and everything. In the end, the cow dies. We just prolonged its agony. So it's better to let it die. You see that one? So that's a very strong argument from Putin, and that's what we need to reverse by saying that it's a long-distance race. And Ukraine will hold on. Ukraine, helped by the Western camp, will last longer than you. If we can instill even just a little doubt in the Russian people, and at least in its leaders, under
Subtitling ST501.
Subtitling ST 501. Subtitling 501. Subtitling ST 501. Well, it will destabilize Putin with regard to his public opinion, who will say, I was okay with a special military operation, but if it turns into a full-scale war, no?
That is to say, for example, we forbid Russia, I think, Keshild. If Russia has two strategic objectives, to conquer Ukraine militarily, which they are not achieving, and to make Ukraine collapse economically, then we would be preventing Ukraine from collapsing. So, with no strategic objectives left for Putin, de-escalation naturally follows.
For Putin, there is the issue of challenging the certainty of his victory. He thinks it's time to pocket the gains, Sue. You see, this is the moment when he is at his peak. That's when you have to be generous and say, I'm ready to talk. And so he would keep most of what he has now, and then he would let Ukraine go and all that. So it wouldn't be a victory for him, but it would be better than waiting too long.
And the collapse
of his army, and the collapse that will completely change everything as a result.
But isn't there a way to expose Russia's strategic weaknesses? Ukraine is striking farther with more effective missiles impacting the economy. Even Kaliningrad, which they pretend is their stronghold, but they're actually surrounded. Isn't there a way for us to wage an information war like the one they're waging against us?
For example, and I really like the example of Kaliningrad because it's presented as a factor of strength in the middle of the West, but it's actually mostly a weakness for Russia. Kaliningrad is actually very vulnerable.
And this storytelling about Russia's inevitable victory is not shared by any military person you talk to or any strategist. Any geopolitical expert will tell you Russia is low on supplies, can't recruit further, and its economy is struggling. How is it that we can't get this message across, even in the storytelling, even in our own countries?
I think it's due to lingering effects of... If from the beginning he put us in a position where he looks down on us from the top of the ladder, if you will, so that's where he put us, we always look upward, and paradoxically, even if we climb the ladder, we'll keep looking up. And we might even be surprised ourselves to see it. Hey, but actually, Vladimir, I'm the one above you now. Now, you're going to listen to me. And then these informational actions, because a large part of the opinions about who is to blame for the war, for example, it's NATO's fault. We still hear that in France. Even Trump, in a way, if Ukraine hadn't resisted, there wouldn't have been a war. Oh yeah, that's true. And
in this case, we're not talking about that. The story of the dying cow. We know very well that the Ukrainian resistance saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. We know what happened in the occupied areas, the 700,000 children officially deported. Just 2 hours from Paris, 700,000 children were deported. These are Russia's numbers, tens of thousands dead, Bakhmut and more. Such language is unacceptable here, ladies.
Yes, but we don't draw the consequences from it. Because after all, for many people, this war in Ukraine, we watch it from the outside as if it were a spectacle. C11, where we insert coins to keep it going, it's our war for lack of doing.
The effort to put an end to it. And so here, Putin's calculation of wanting to target Ukraine, of trying to isolate Ukraine, the fact that it's not working, can we prove to him that this calculation will be a failure to achieve once again the peace that we all hope for?
We have to keep going, and we have to take strong actions, for example.
Sky Shield.
For example, exercises around Kaliningrad, just to remind him of Kaliningrad's vulnerability. For example, much tougher declaratory policies. When it comes to Lukashenko, I'm surprised that everyone forgets Lukashenko. Lukashenko is a war criminal. He took part in this war. The forces that went to Kyiv set out from his territory. Russian artillery is firing from Belarusian territory. So, in every way, he's not just an accomplice, he's complicit in the war. Let's be clear, when this is over, we'll discuss it again, comrades. There, you're going to get chewed up, my friend. While here we're reasoning, we should tell Lukashenko that his days are numbered in reality.
So we're taking initiative again? In Ukraine on one side, facing Russia on the other?
Yes, I think so. So we also need to think, and that should motivate us, because here I'm talking about coordinated escalation. It's possible then, maybe it wasn't the case in 2022, but it's possible that there is a coordinated strategy from China, from Russia, from North Korea, from Iran. In short, from the political revisionists challenging the so-called international order, which we have to admit is a chaos controlled by the West, and so on. But for example, for Putin to escalate vertically, for China to escalate horizontally by threatening Taiwan in particular, North Korea and Iran are participating in vertical escalation by directly helping the Russian war effort, and also in horizontal escalation by creating other hotspots. That's it. So in fact, we are facing Putin not on one scale, but on several scales at once, where the guys help each other.
And
we have to take that into account. And in this regard, a success of the West in Ukraine would destabilize all their scales. So there is more at stake in Ukraine than just a simple Europe-Russia debate, or even Russia itself. And Ukraine is just the beginning of the debate, actually.
And by the way, I recall your statements from 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. At the time, you said we were seeing the beginnings of World War III. We're still trying to prevent escalation.
And we all want to avoid World War III. But that means being credible. When we say that to avoid it, we'll do whatever it takes to prevent it.
Yes, and that politicians align themselves with the military's stance to stop the escalation.
Not all military personnel agree with me. And here, I'm not thinking as a military man, I'm thinking as a
strategist.
At least we were trained in strategy. Yes?
Congratulations, in general. A big thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed it. The link will be in the video comments. For Sky Shield, who leads the initiative? Is it also for Sky Protection? Ukraine protecting civilians far to the west to avoid being in direct confrontation with Russia. Currently, 93% of Russian attacks target civilians. That's 2,600 attacks on healthcare and 3,000 schools were facing something we shouldn't accept. There are ways to protect them without escalating or de-escalating, as you saw with the general. Thank you, we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you very soon.